Before GPS, before automatic transmissions, before any of the technology that modern trucks use to make the job easier, there were drivers who spent their entire careers inside a cab that was built around what they actually needed. Not what looked good in a brochure, what worked at 3 in the morning on a dark highway with a full load and 400 miles still to go. Today, we're talking about the trucks that understood the driver first and built everything else around that. Let's get into the first one. This is the channel that still remembers when trucks were built to last. No dealership talk, no hype about the latest model, just the iron that proved itself the hard way. Mile by mile, load by load, year after year. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now and ring the bell. Every week we bring you what the salesman hopes you never find out. In 1985, Kenworth did something that nobody in the American trucking industry had seriously attempted before. It looked at fuel economy not as a byproduct of engine efficiency, but as a function of aerodynamics, and it redesigned an entire truck from the ground up around that principle. The result was the T600, and the result looked like nothing that had ever been on an American highway. The sloped hood that gave the T600 its nickname, the Anteater, wasn't a styling choice. It was the product of wind tunnel testing that had identified the conventional long-nose hood as a massive aerodynamic liability. By sloping that hood downward and forward, Kenworth reduced aerodynamic drag by 40% compared to a conventional truck of the same era. That reduction saved thousands in fuel costs and set the template for every modern highway tractor that followed. Kenworth. The driver sat differently in the T600 than in any conventional truck before it. The sloped hood changed the sight lines, changed the relationship between the cab and the road, changed the way the truck felt to operate at highway speed. Drivers who had spent careers in long-nose conventionals had to adjust. Some never liked it. But the ones who ran it long enough to understand what the aerodynamics were doing to their fuel bills became converts who stayed converted. Kenworth developed the T600's digital dashboard in conjunction with Boeing. An aerospace company helping design a truck instrument panel was a collaboration that made sense when you understood what Kenworth was trying to do. It was trying to put the driver in an environment where information was organized around what the driver needed to know rather than around what was easiest to instrument. That approach, starting with the driver's actual needs, produced a cab that felt different from inside than anything that had existed before it. The T600 ran until it was replaced by the T660, which itself was eventually succeeded by the T680, each generation built on what the Anteater had proved. But the original T600 was the truck that proved it first, in the face of a market that had never seen a sloped hood and wasn't immediately sure what to make of one. Hold on, because the next one didn't change the shape of the truck. It changed the shape of the driver's life. In 1976, America was celebrating its 200th birthday. Kenworth chose that year to introduce something it called the VIT 200 Bicentennial Edition, the first factory-built raised-roof sleeper in the history of the American trucking industry. Shoreline Truck Parts. The name VIT stood for Very Important Trucker. That name was a statement about who Kenworth thought it was building for and how Kenworth thought that person deserved to be treated, not as a cost to be managed. As a professional whose working environment deserved real investment. The Aerodyne sleeper offered 7 feet of headroom, meaning a driver could stand upright inside the truck for the first time in history. That sentence requires a moment to fully absorb. Before 1976, no driver in America could stand up straight inside a factory-built sleeper. The sleeping accommodations that existed were cramped, low-ceilinged spaces that a driver crawled into and crawled out of. Adequate for sleeping if you weren't too tall. Not adequate for anything else. Kenworth. The Aerodyne changed that. 7 feet of headroom meant a driver could dress standing up, could move around, could spend time in the sleeper doing something other than sleeping in a position that didn't strain the back. For the husband and wife team running a truck together around the clock, For the father and son operation that kept the unit moving 24 hours a day, the Aerodyne created a living space that made that kind of continuous operation genuinely sustainable rather than merely possible. The comment that surfaced on this channel from a viewer described the Kenworth VIT concept as revolutionary, noting that teams could pay off their trucks in record time simply by operating the unit around the clock, with one driver sleeping in genuine comfort while the other ran the route. That wasn't possible before. The sleeper had to be livable enough for one driver to actually rest in it while the truck kept moving. The Aerodyne made it livable, and that made the economics of team driving work in a way that changed the industry permanently. Every studio sleeper on every long-haul truck in America today descends from what Kenworth introduced in 1976. 50 years later, the concept is so standard that nobody thinks about where it came from. It came from here. Get ready, because the next one took the widest cab in the industry and filled it with space that drivers had been asking for since the beginning of long-haul trucking. There is a specific category of driver complaint that accumulates over decades of long-haul operation. It isn't about engine power or fuel economy or even ride quality. It's about width, about the feeling of being compressed into a space that wasn't designed for someone of above-average height or build. About a cab that fit the average without considering everyone else. The International 9900i addressed this with a Skyrise Pro Sleeper offering a floor-to-ceiling height of 102 inches, the tallest available in the industry at the time, not 77 inches, not 84 inches, 102 inches, 8.5 feet of interior height in a truck sleeper. The driver, who had spent 30 years folding himself into undersized bunks and hitting his head on overhead storage units, found in the 9900i something he had never experienced in a cab before. Room. Vanderhoogs. The 9900i was International's flagship conventional, competing directly against the Peterbilt 379 and Kenworth W900 for the owner-operator who wanted maximum cab space and wasn't willing to compromise on interior volume in exchange for marginal fuel economy gains. International understood that for a driver who lived in that cab for weeks at a time, the difference between a cab that fit and a cab that didn't wasn't a comfort preference. It was a quality-of-life issue that compounded over years into a physical toll that the driver and the driver's family both felt. The cab itself was wide, wider than most of the competition. The viewer who mentioned the 9900i in the comments of this channel described it alongside the Freightliner Classic XL as representing the pinnacle of American trucks precisely because both offered the widest conventional cabs in the industry combined with large ergonomic studio sleepers. That combination, cab width plus sleeper volume, was what separated the trucks that drivers chose when they were spending their own money from the trucks that fleets chose when they were minimizing purchase price. The 9900i represented International at its most driver-focused. Before the regulations that changed what trucks could look like and how their engines could be built. Before the era of emissions control systems that added cost and complexity without adding anything that the driver inside the cab could use. It was built for the driver who understood what he needed and was willing to pay for a truck that delivered it. Prepare yourself, because the next one built its entire reputation on a single promise. The widest, most livable cab ever put on an American road. Freightliner had built its reputation on practical engineering, aluminum construction that saved weight and increased payload, aerodynamic advances that improved fuel economy before the regulations required it. A focus on what owner-operators actually needed rather than what looked most impressive at a truck show. The Classic XL was all of those things applied to the problem of driver comfort at the level of the truck's maximum capability. The 84-inch raised roof sleeper on the Classic XL was a full foot longer than anything previously offered by Freightliner. The driver's lounge option featured a lower bunk that measured a full 80 by 40 inches and flipped up to convert the space for work or dining with a table and two opposing bench-style seats. The floor was flat throughout. The spring mattress was a full 80 inches long. These were not approximations of comfort. They were specific dimensions that Freightliner had arrived at by asking what a driver who spent 3 weeks in a truck needed from the space where he slept and ate and spent the hours between drives. Vanderhoogs. The classic XL cab itself was among the widest available in the American market. The viewer who mentioned it alongside the International 9900i was identifying what those two trucks shared that most of their competitors didn't. Both had been designed with the understanding that the driver's physical space was a professional requirement, not an amenity. Both had been built to the dimensions that actual long-haul operation demanded, rather than to the dimensions that were easiest to engineer or cheapest to manufacture. Freightliner also announced connectivity features for the classic XL that were genuinely forward-thinking for their era. Shore power ports, phone connections, cable television, in-cab internet access. Not because technology required it, but because drivers who spent weeks away from home deserved access to the same basic comforts that everyone else in American life took for granted. The Classic XL has fans who speak about it the way audiophiles speak about certain recordings. Not as a historical artifact to be appreciated at a distance, but as something that got something fundamentally right in a way that everything that came after it has been trying to replicate without quite arriving at the same place. We've reached the last one, and this one started the entire conversation about what driver comfort could mean. The full story of what the 1976 Kenworth Aerodyne meant requires understanding what came before it. Before the Aerodyne, the American long-haul trucker lived a specific kind of existence. The cab was the workspace. The sleeper was the afterthought, a compartment tacked onto the back of the cab because drivers needed somewhere to sleep and nobody had invested seriously in what that somewhere should actually be. Low ceilings, narrow bunks, spaces designed to meet a minimum rather than to serve a person. The Aerodyne sleeper cab was a groundbreaking development within the trucking community at that time, as comfortable living accommodations for truckers were minimal, if not completely non-existent. The W900A with the Aerodyne didn't just offer more space. It offered a different philosophy about who the driver was and what the driver deserved. Kenworth named the initial production run the VIT 200. Very important trucker. 200 for America's bicentennial. A statement that the person driving this truck across the American continent was not a background figure but a central one, and that the truck being built for that person should reflect that understanding. Truck news. 7 feet of headroom meant a trucker could stand tall in the sleeper. Twin skylight windows brought natural light into a space that had previously been essentially a dark box attached to the back of a cab. Dual bunks that allowed 2 drivers to operate a truck continuously, one sleeping in genuine comfort while the other ran the route, made the economics of team driving work in a way that changed how long-haul operations were structured. The driver who bought a W900A with the Aerodyne in 1976 was buying something that had never existed before. Not just a more comfortable truck, a different relationship between the job and the person doing it. A recognition that the man or woman spending weeks away from home, driving through the night, keeping America's supply chain moving, deserved a living space that respected the difficulty and the importance of what they were doing. Every raised roof sleeper on every truck on every American highway today descends from that 1976 decision. The concept that Kenworth proved in that initial Aerodyne has been refined, expanded, and improved across 50 years of subsequent development. But the original insight, that the driver's living space was worth taking seriously, came from here. From a truck company that decided in America's bicentennial year that the very important trucker deserved a very important truck. The Kenworth T600 Anteater, the Kenworth W900A Aerodyne, the International 9900i, the Freightliner Classic XL, and the WW900A with the original Aerodyne sleeper that started it all. 5 trucks that understood something that the industry has spent 50 years trying to improve on and has never fully replaced. That the driver isn't a component of the system. The driver is the system. And a truck that's built around the driver performs differently than a truck that's built around everything else and asks the driver to fit into whatever space is left. That's what these trucks were. The ones that got built around the person doing the work. And that's why the people who drove them still talk about them the way they do. Tell us in the comments, which of these 5 did you drive? Or did someone in your family drive? And what was it like to spend real time inside a cab that was actually built for you? Drop it below because we want to hear that story. Like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell. Next week we've got more content that the dealership hopes you never watch. See you then. The Kenworth T600 Anteater, the Kenworth W900A Aerodyne, the International 9900i, the Freightliner Classic XL, and the W900A with the original Aerodyne sleeper that started it all. 5 trucks that understood something that the industry has spent 50 years trying to improve on and has never fully replaced. That the driver isn't a component of the system. The driver is the system. And a truck that's built around the driver performs differently than a truck that's built around everything else and asks the driver to fit into whatever space is left. That's what these trucks were. The ones that got built around the person doing the work. And that's why the people who drove them still talk about them the way they do. Tell us in the comments, which of these 5 did you drive, or did someone in your family drive? And what was it like to spend real time inside a cab that was actually built for you? Drop it below because we want to hear that story. Like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell. Next week we've got more content that the dealership hopes you never watch. See you then.